Okay. Let's see what happens. You ready to take over, Abdul? We're not live yet, are we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you there?
Yeah. Luciani,
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you want to start now then?
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you properly.
Okay. Well, let's let me know when we're starting and we'll start. Luciani.
Yes, you can start now, Chris.
Okay, lovely. Well, good evening, everybody.
Are you still there?
Members of the public who may be watching on this is a meeting of the Licensing and Appeals Committee of Woking Borough Council on the 6th of October 2020. My name's Cameron. Technical trouble this evening, so I'm going to keep it off. Before you proceed to go through, please, can you ensure that your mobile devices and phones are switched off? As I said, this is being live streamed on YouTube. Only members of the committee and relevant officers may speak. To minimise noise, please switch off microphones for you. Only use your camera when you're speaking. We have, I'm sure which members we have here tonight, but we have, I hope we have 4 officers: Luciani Bowker, Julia O'Brien, Susan McLaughlin, and Sean Murphy. For each of the agenda items where we will have a discussion and come to a conclusion, first of all, the officers will present their report, then members will ask questions, then officers will use the hand-up facility to answer questions, and members will also use the hand-up facility to vote. And before we start the meeting properly, I have to explain why we have decided to withdraw the item on fees and charges of 2001 to 22. These proposals, things are concerned, were only realised at the Public Protection Partnership meeting we had.
You've disappeared again.
And attention team and the exam.
Chris, you're breaking up quite a lot. You're breaking up quite a lot. I wonder if it'd be better if you joined via your telephone, if you dial in the number.
Yep. Tell me what the number. I've never done this before, but tell me what the number is.
The number is. Have you got a pen?
the fees and charges 2021 to 22 because we really hadn't enough time, the corporate leadership team or the executive, to consider them. So I expect that will come back to the November the 10th meeting. Well, it has to come back to that meeting because our recommendations on fees and charges needs to go to the executive, which meets on November the 26th. This won't slow up the process of setting these fees and charges. The executive meeting is still unchanged. We're just delaying by a month in putting forward our proposals. If everybody sounds very quiet out there, if everyone's okay with that, I'll move on to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, members?
Sorry, Chair, we have gone through the apologies and the minutes from the previous meeting.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yes.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. Can I just add to that? Harry's actually just sent a message. He's actually in the executive briefing at the moment, so he might be joining us later on.
Okay, Michael. Thank you. And so minutes of the last meeting. Are there any comments on the minutes of the last meeting, members? I hear nothing.
Councillor Rachel Borghese has got her hand raised.
Okay, you'll have to help me here, Luciani. Thank you, because I can't see anything, obviously.
Yeah, so I'll keep telling you. Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said, but go ahead, whichever member it was.
It was me, Councillor Burgess. I just want one brief question. On page 5 of the packet talks about the out of area operators, and there was an action for another more strongly worded letter to be written to the government about that issue. Can I ask if that was actioned with officers and yourself?
I think so. Yes, I think. Well, I certainly sent one letter. Perhaps the officers can help here. Was that after this matter was discussed?
Hello, Chairman. It's Julia here.
Hello, Julia.
Hello. Just to confirm, we sent you the letters which you signed and sent out not long after the beginning of lockdown, which was following on from the minutes of the meeting.
Okay, splendid. Thank you, Julia. Is that okay, Rachel?
Yeah. Could I ask if we got a response to that letter, or chased a response?
I have not. I don't think the officers have either.
I'm not aware of anything, I'm afraid, no.
Could I ask that we chase a response? Because I don't think we've ever had a response in the letters that we've written.
Yep, we can do.
Yeah, you can do that, yeah.
Okay,
So thank you. Is there anything else, Rachel?
No,
if
thanks.
Not, okay, thank you, Rachel. Declarations of interest, members. None. Public question time, Luciani?
We haven't received any public questions.
No, I don't believe there are any member questions either.
No.
I think that's correct. Fees and charges we are jumping over, so that will come back to the next meeting, as I said earlier. We now move on to statutory taxi and private hire report, and that's your report, Sean. Can you give us that, please?
Actually, it's going to be me.
Oh, Julia. Okay, I don't mind. That's fine.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Chairman, thank you, and members. The report in front of you today is to do with the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, which hopefully you've all got copies of the report of. Essentially, this is a report for you to note in the main body and the background of the report are some of the main areas that the guidance is seeking to look at. And essentially, it's an attempt by the government to come up with some standardised, although they haven't gone as far as insisting that everybody becomes standardised in terms of vehicle standards and driver standards and operator standards, as actually going that far. So we are commended to its guidance. So we are asked to treat it as guidance, although we must have regard to it. So interesting play of words there. But what we're proposing to do is to look at our existing policies and I'm pleased to say that we actually incorporate quite a lot of the things that we're being commended to do. So, for example, the CSE training we already do as standard safeguarding training for drivers. The other sort of things we look at is complaints against licensees. We have a fairly robust complaint system that we adhere to. The DBS checks we do not as frequently as we're being asked to do, but going forward we will look at those. Members will recall that we have already looked at the revocations and the guidance that came out from the Institute of Licensing on convictions policies. So we've already incorporated that into our policy. So there are quite a few things in there that we will look at further, and then we will bring another report back with our amended policy in the light of these items. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Members, any comments on that? It seems fairly straightforward. If not, okay.
I've got a few people with their hands up. I'm going to try and go in the order they came up, Chris. Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is fairly straightforward, and it's useful to see the kind of areas that they'll be looking at. And it sounds like we've got a lot of it covered, which is good. I think what's missing for us at the moment, we can't really tell which areas we do need to improve on, and how much work would be needed. So I assume that the future reports will give us that information, and it might be an idea to rag rate the issues so that we can see, which areas are sort of more difficult, and more work is needed to actually complete those, particularly as it says that the Department of Transport will be monitoring our compliance. My other quick question was whether, because we know that the drivers are suffering financially, particularly at the moment, and are there likely to be any cost implications for the actual drivers as a part of all of this review?
Julia, could you answer?
Thank you, Councillor Burgess. Certainly the only one I think that there may be is the DBS checks, because they'll be asked to sign up to the DBS update service. However, potentially that will work out cheaper than asking somebody to do a DBS every year. I think it's please don't quote me, but I think it's something like £15 to £20 to sign up for that. Whereas, as you know, the actual DBS, if we had to do that yearly, is something like £92. So hopefully not odd, but
if we could give the drivers fair warning as best we can. I mean, they certainly don't want extra costs at the moment, do they?
No, and this will have to be consulted on as well, Chairman. So
yeah. Okay.
I've got Councillor Sarah Kerr.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Rachel's already touched on one of the points I was going to make, that it would be helpful to understand where we are and where the gap is between what we're already doing and where we need to be. I just want to firstly just check on something. It says in the report that these are statutory standards, but you've just said that it's guidance. So is it statutory or not?
It is guidance, as I said when I presented it, but we are told that we should do it, but it is still guidance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's strange. Sorry. I was going to say it's a strange thing to. I mean, I thought statutory meant that it was the result of a statute passed by Parliament that you would have to obey. It's the law.
No,
it doesn't seem quite to mean that here.
No.
I always find that term confusing, but no, that's fine. With regards to the timescales for this, and you mentioned consultation, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the timescales for putting this through before implementing the changes, and how you're actually planning to go about consulting on this, please.
Thank you. We would look to put it can't be the next meeting of the Licensing Appeals Committee, because that's in November, so we won't get it done by then. So I think I'll have to take advice from Luciani on when the meeting after that would be. Possibly March, Would it be, Luciani?
It is in March, yes.
Okay. In which case, I would hope that we would be well under the way of undertaking all these amendments to the policy, which would then come back before members for their agreement before it would then be consulted on. And then it talks in the guidance on a wide range of consultees, obviously the trade, but also various groups, residents, people, and general people businesses who may or may not use taxis. So a very wide consultation.
Okay, fabulous. And this will go to the taxi liaison group, will it?
Yes, as part of the consultation, and we can even, we can have discussions with them as well. Yeah.
Okay, so when do you expect this finally to go to executive or full council to put for approval?
I don't think it'll get it. We do this ourselves, I think.
Okay, so it just needs to go through this committee and no further.
Well, I'll just check with officers. I think that's correct, isn't it?
Chairman, it's Sean Murphy. Yes, that would be correct. So this would be a matter for this committee to sign off the conditions.
Okay, so we get it probably March, then goes to consultation. So when are we likely to finally sign off on it?
The consultation period, the government guidance is 12 weeks as a sort of a standard, but we could do it in less than that. So if that's March, April, May, June. So we would be looking at finalise it sometime in the summer next year.
Okay. Right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else? Any other member wishing to speak on this item?
Yes, Chris, I've got Paul Fishwick.
Yep, Paul, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. Sarah and Rachel have actually asked some of my questions, but I do have one other. On page 50, item 2.6, it states certificates of good character should be obtained, but the ACRO criminal police records state there are no organisations within the UK which offer a certificate of good character or good conduct. So how do we get around that one?
Which paragraph? That's not
page 50, item 2.6, line 2.6.
I don't see what you just said in 2.6. That's at the bottom of 50, isn't it?
Yeah, the very bottom. Yeah. It says overseas convictions. DBS cannot obtain criminal records held overseas. Certificates of good character should be obtained where an applicant has previously lived outside the UK. Okay, so my question was the ACRO police records state there are no organisations within the UK which offer a certificate of good character or good conduct. So how do we get around that?
This is in fact one of the things that is in our current policy, and what we ask the drivers to do is to approach the embassy where they have been for the 3 months that they were out of the country, and they provide that for us.
Okay, so it's covered in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Chris, I've got Councillor Bill Swan.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Paul actually has just asked the question that I was going to ask, but there is just one other point. On 221, we talk about stretch limos. Do we have any stretch limo organisations in the borough? And if so, why do we not view these in the same way as private hire?
Thank you, Bill. Stretch limos are currently in our policy, and we do view them as private hire. So that's not going to be any difficult.
That's already done.
Already done, yeah. And no, we don't have it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you're really chairing the meeting here, Luciani. I can't do anything.
I don't see any more hands raised.
Okay, that's fine then. So we go back to there's two parts to the recommendation. I don't think we need to vote on the first. That's just a note. Should we take a vote on the second bit, which is agreeing to what we need to do? Is that okay, Luciana? If it is, can we take? Well, you'll have to run it. I'm voting in favour, because I can't raise my hand. Can members raise their hands?
Yes, members can.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying exactly the same. Members, if you're in favour, just raise your hand.
Yes.
Yeah, it's unanimous, Chris.
Unanimous. Okay, splendid. So we come to the end of that, and we move on to item 8, which is taxi liaison group update. I think this probably is you, Sean. Yes, I'm sure it's you. Sean, please.
Chair, it's I think Judy is picking this one up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Right. No, you'll have your moment of fame soon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
No, actually, Karen's going to be picking this one up.
Oh, well, lovely. Nice to see you, Karen. Well, I can't see you.
Sorry.
Here, Karen.
To you.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I would like to just update the committee on the latest taxi liaison group meeting. Are you all hearing me all okay, I assume?
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, Karen. If you could put your camera on, that would be great.
Sure. Okay.
Hello, stranger.
Hello, everyone. The last meeting was held on the 10th of September. As you all know, this group was set up to facilitate liaison between the taxi trade, both Hackney and private hire, with officers and members. So this meeting was held. I know three of you, Chris Baring, Rachel Burgess and Barry Patman, all attended that meeting, along with, we had a Hackney trade representative and also private hire operator representative. Their names have been removed for this meeting, but obviously you're aware of that. Unfortunately, with the private hire operator, I don't know if you picked up at the time, but what actually happened was that when we eventually managed to get him onto the meeting, he was fine. He could hear the whole meeting, but unfortunately it was his audio. So when he was trying to comment, unfortunately he couldn't. But he assures us that for the next meeting he will address and have that resolved. So just to update you on those, there were some action points agreed at the end. The first was that the agreed fee reductions have already been implemented. There's been no further proposal on either fees or to review the tariff received from the trade. Consultation on fees and charges obviously is covered separately, and we know about that. And finally, the audit exercise is being arranged. Sean Murphy obviously will lead on that meeting, and we currently have two due date suggestions out with the trade and are awaiting confirmation on the date of that meeting. The second item which we discussed was the age of vehicles. The committee at this meeting is now asked to consider and agree whether it wishes to temporarily suspend those upper age limits for both private hire and Hackney carriage vehicles, as set out in the current policy, which you have a link to. There's a suggestion that this could be for a period of up to 12 months. We would recommend that it should be a defined start and end date for this if it is agreed, and also that any vehicle would still need to pass the Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle test, in addition to the standard MOT test. In coming to the decision, we're asking the committee to take into account the reason why these were introduced and put into the policy, which is for reasons of public safety and safeguarding by ensuring that all vehicles on the road are safe. So that's to look at the private hire for 8 years maximum and Hackney carriage 10 years, but that won't probably apply because those are obviously the newer vehicles that are brought on. So generally it will be the vehicles that are reaching age at the moment are 15. So it would be to in effect remove or extend that 15-year limit. Also, we're asking the committee to consider whether it would be appropriate to suspend the condition 254, where there is a requirement for, if a vehicle wishes to extend beyond that, it produces an advanced inspection report offered by the RAC. And again, the committee is asked to take into account the reason why that has been introduced, again, for the safety of a vehicle of that age, so that we're quite sure that vehicles on licensed on our licensed fleet are all safe. The next item for consideration was the height of vehicles that was considered. That is all set out in paragraph 2.9, disabled access of the policy. And again, that was debated previously at committee. It's been introduced to ensure compliance with section 165 of the Equality Act, and therefore we don't feel it's appropriate to put forward any proposal to amend these dimensions for that reason. And we've also attached the other local authorities' position on height requirements and age limits for comparison, and you'll see obviously that we're fairly comparative with others. There was also discussion about the taxi ranks. As you're always aware, there have been issues with the taxi ranks in Wokingham. I've been working quite closely with Martin Heath now in traffic management, and we were advised that when the first rank were open, they opened the rank outside Broad Street, and then the two other ranks in Broad Street. So those are all now operational. There was a possibility they were going to have to be suspended for a short period of time, but luckily traffic management were able to work in such a way that they were able to do the work without needing to suspend those. There's also an update on the two new temporary ranks, which will be in the marketplace on the loading bays outside Boots and then WH Smith. These will be evening ranks only. They will operate from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and there will be capacity of 3 vehicles outside Boots and 6 outside Market House. So that will obviously help. Once these aren't operational at the moment, once the signage is on order and once those ranks are operational, once the signage is up, we will be advised, and then we will cascade that out obviously to committee and to the drivers as well. What we're doing is keeping the drivers advised with regular update emails on the situation, to keep them advised on what's happening with both ranks and also on various COVID updates as they've come out, and those also being posted on the PPP website. So we're kind of trying to do as much as we can at the moment to keep members, to keep the taxi trade informed of what's happening. Okay, I think those are the items that were on the report. Obviously, happy to take any questions, and the committee may now wish to debate those items. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Karen. I would just say the Hackney cab drivers are having a pretty rough time at the moment. I mean, like a lot of businesses, they're suffering from a pretty massive loss of trade through the pandemic. They've also got the possibility of organisations like Uber, which we rightly regard as trading not really fairly with the Hackney cab drivers. And more recently, the 10 o'clock curfew is not going to help either. But maybe that's going to be dealt with soon and got rid of. I hope it is got rid of. So very sympathetic to their plight at the moment. So anything we can do to help, which is reasonable and proportionate, then I think we should be considering it. Shall we go through the 4 items? If we start with the fees, members, do you any comments on the fees where we have given some reductions in the past?
Chris, I can see a couple of councillors with their hands raised.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Emma Hobbs.
Yep.
Emma
Hi,
Hobbs.
Karen. Nice to see you again. Long time no see.
Thank you, Emma.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, the age of the vehicles, the 8 and the 10 years. I have
Emma, can we stick to fees? I was just going to go through them 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay,
So
I don't have any questions about. I don't have anything about the fees.
Come back in a second.
Okay.
Was everyone else?
Rachel Burgess.
Thank you. Yeah, on the fees, it was really to do with partly to do with the wording of the report. Because I think it's quite disingenuous to sort of put the onus on the drivers on this one by saying that there was no proposal from the drivers on fees. Because actually, if you read the minutes of the liaison group, if you look at the bottom of page 8 of the supplementary paper we got, the ball's actually in the council's court on this one to carry out the line-by-line review of the methodology and go through that line by line with the trade. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that we were expecting something from the trade, because actually the ball's in our court on that one. And obviously that was that was linked.
There's a correction there, Rachel. I think that last bit's actually referring to the tariffs. That's what the drivers charge the public. I think that's right, isn't it? I don't know how it crept into fees, because that's not really fees, is it? Is that correct, Sean? Or Karen?
Yes, Chair. I believe that relates to the tariffs. Yeah, the increase in what they charge, not what we charge them.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
To clarify as well, we left it with the trade that if there were any issues, obviously the proposed tariff, which they don't want to go ahead with, but we left it with them that if there were any further issues that they wanted to raise, to come back with us on an email and confirm those issues. I think that's
okay. And just on the review of the methodology, that did relate back to an internal audit recommendation from a year ago. And I think you said that there was some dates. Do you know roughly when that is actually going to happen? Because obviously that's the basis of how it's all calculated. So it is really important that we get some assurance on how that hourly rate is calculated and whether it's robust.
Yes, and we've put out two dates later on in October to the trade. So once we have response from them, then we will confirm up that meeting date.
So that just to finish, that will be in time for our review of the fees and charges at the next meeting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so anything else, Rachel?
Not on the fees, no, thanks.
Okay, move on then. Someone
I've got Lindsay Ferris.
Lindsay, up. Evening, Lindsay.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, it links to, I know that we've had a number of fees that they've not been happy with, which is where the reduction's coming from, which is what I call a permanent reduction, because they weren't happy with how the charges were conducted. What is the situation regarding during this pandemic? Are we proposing some temporary reductions in fees during that period to help them? And if not, does that come under what we would be discussing in future, or is that something we can touch on tonight?
I think that would be for Sean to answer, please.
Chair, I mean, clearly, obviously, the fees item is coming back to this committee in November. By that stage, I would have hoped that obviously with the dates that we've got in mind for October, we will have had those conversations with the trade about how the fees are constructed. Clearly, it would be a matter for this committee when they discuss fees to recommend to executive and then obviously through to council what those fees should be, and that would include any recommendations about reductions.
If there were a reduction, that would apply retrospectively to the current financial year, municipal year, would it not? Would that, if that were to happen, would that mean we would be giving rebates to the drivers?
Well, I mean, there's two items you could look at. As far, from my understanding, you could look at basically whether you wish to rebate anything in relation to this financial year, and that would clearly need to be a recommendation through to the relevant forum within the council. I presume that would be council itself when the fees are discussed this year. And clearly, obviously, the other option is to look at a recommendation with relation to fees for next year. So you could look at what the actual fee this committee believes it should be, and then any options you wish to put forward around any reduction in light of the plight faced by the trade at this current time.
Yeah, so there could be a retrospective then.
Yes, yes, I believe so.
I think that's what members are looking for, but it obviously would. I know we get the impression of kicking the ball down the road, whatever the phrase, kicking the can down the road sometimes, but it's only 4 weeks to the next meeting, and we will have the proposed fees for Hackney, well, for all the drivers, and then we could consider retrospective reduction. If that happened, I don't know whether it would happen since the review's still going on.
Chair, could I just say, obviously, with the reductions that were agreed last year were implemented. So the £80 reduction that was agreed for last year was applied retrospectively and was applied to the fees last year. And certainly in the £40 reduction that came into this year, so that was built into the fee structure, and the fee was reduced by £40 in Wokingham as compared to the other two PPP areas. So it would be a very similar kind of, I guess, debate, and decision-making process in November when you come to discuss fees.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Sean.
Chris, could I? Thank you. I think you partially answered the question, because what I think I was looking at was what we do during the period of the pandemic, 23rd of March onwards. We've got a reduction because of the process. That's one issue, but we need to think about what we do for them during this pandemic period, because, to be honest, they're not even getting 10% of the business that they used to have, or certainly not with the ones where I am in Twyford. So I think we need to think about what we could offer, and I accept that we do that at the November. But I think it's something I would like to have clarified as to what we would do, because we're talking about whatever period the pandemic is. So once the pandemic is over and their business comes back, then I would say that we go back up to the figures that we've got that have been revised as a result of the methodology. So I'm talking about a period of time during the pandemic.
Yes, understood.
Chair, can I make a suggestion based on that when we bring back the fees paper in November, what we can do is set out basically give some indication to the committee as to what the cost of any such reduction would be, based on a kind of sliding scale, and that may help inform the committee at that time with respect to any recommendations.
Yes, that would be helpful, I think. Members happy with that?
I see that Emma Hobbs has got her hand raised.
Yes, I know. She was. Yes, go on there, Emma.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've just got 3 questions, Karen, which I might have misheard you. With reference to the age of vehicles, personally, I think I would be happy to give them an extension of deadline because of the coronavirus. The second question I have is, you mentioned about the 2.54 extended advance inspections. Personally, I think we should continue with those inspections, because what we don't want is old vehicles suddenly falling to bits and somebody gets really badly hurt. And another question, you mentioned about the height. Why did they bring in the height for the disabled people? What was their concerns about the heights of vehicles?
Well, that's the next section, Emma. You're jumping ahead again.
Sorry.
We'll deal with the first questions you raised.
Karen, your mic's off. Your mic's off.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. Yeah, to answer the question, it's really for the committee to decide whether, the proposal is that the RAC check could be dispensed with temporarily if required. Obviously, it was brought in for a reason, but that could be considered, and really then whether the age limits are required to be extended or not.
You still need to pass the Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle test. Yes. So if we were to implement this, it wouldn't be a safety issue. It's more that the vehicle looks old, and we don't want that on the roads, I think.
The safety issue is an additional check for that older vehicle at 15 years of age. So if it then goes through an advanced RAC check, we know that it's been looked at in detail. Obviously, our prime concern is that if we're to license that vehicle for another year, we need to be confident that it's safe on the road.
I can understand that. That's why I said, me personally, I would be more comfortable continuing with this advanced RAC inspection. I'd feel very nervous, but then that's my own personal opinion. It's up to the rest of the committee as well, obviously.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, take your point.
Who else do we have?
Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, no, I would definitely support a suspension of the requirement for the RAC inspection. These checks cost around £320, and drivers' income, as we've already said, has plummeted, and they, many of them just can't afford it. And their only alternative at the moment is to purchase a new vehicle because their vehicle has reached the end of its stated life according to our policy. So, I mean, bearing in mind the circumstances, you know, as Chris has said, they'd still have to pass the other tests and they'd still have to pass the MOT. So, you know, I understand the safety aspect, but just bearing in mind the circumstances, I think we should change it so that they don't have to do the RAC inspection for a limited period during this, say, the next year.
Okay, I can see Sarah Kerr.
Sarah, yep.
Yep, hi. I was actually just going to ask about these vehicle inspections. I was going to ask about the cost, but Rachel's obviously just explained that. I don't understand what more it gives over and above the other checks, and obviously the cars will have to have MOTs anyway, and other people drive vehicles on the road that are older than 15 years with an MOT. So again, I don't quite see, under the current circumstances and with the cost, why it can't be suspended temporarily. What is the difference? What so much more happens with this that makes a difference? I don't understand.
It's a really detailed check. It's a bit like when you buy a new vehicle, where the RAC literally will go all over the vehicle, just to check, you know, at a higher level than either the MOT or the private hire Hackney carriage test. It was brought in for that reason of public safety. The difference between that and a vehicle that, say, you or I will be driving is that we aren't transporting the public.
Okay, right. Now, I'd certainly be in support of removing that for a year, and possibly to review at the end of the year, because we don't actually know where we're going to be in a year's time either. So this might be something that we need to bring back again and discuss nearer the end of that year, should we decide as a committee to go down that route. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
No, I can't see anybody else. Rachel? Oh, no.
Yeah, no, I did want to just come back. It was just to briefly make it clear, so that those advanced tests are only taken when a car reaches its age limit. So normally they wouldn't. That's correct. Just so that members are clear. It was put in so that drivers would be able to extend the life of their vehicle if they can go through this advanced safety check. That was the reason for it.
That's absolutely correct. Yes, it's at the limit of 15 years. If a driver wants to extend beyond that 15 years, then that's a requirement at that stage, given the age of the vehicle.
Right. How long does that extra check last? Do you have another one of those the following year and each successive year, or just once at 15?
We would then license it for a further 12-month period. So yes, then after that we would then go through the process again.
So are we in effect check every year thereafter? Yeah.
We're just changing these numbers. We're adding one to each of these numbers, aren't we? I think 5 becomes 6, 8 becomes 9. Is that right?
That's really, we're not. What we're saying is that the proposal is, does the committee wish to suspend the age limit? Yeah. So in other words, if a vehicle that was 15 could say go to 16, but if it obviously depends on how long the committee would wish to do this for. We don't know how long this situation will continue.
Chair,
I'm just wondering. It's Sean, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to make an observation. I understand, Karen, maybe you could correct, but I understand that the cost is around about 190. I'm informed for this advanced test. But I think there is another factor here as well. I mean, that may be worth taking into account. Is that clearly with the loss of trade? I mean, clearly the vehicles aren't doing anywhere near the annual mileage that they would ordinarily have been doing. I would imagine that would be a natural kind of conclusion to derive from that if you're looking at 10% income, you're probably looking at 90% drop in mileage, and that may be a factor that the committee may wish to take into consideration when determining both the age of the vehicle issue, but also the issue of this additional test.
Well, we do have a minimal mileage policy somewhere, don't we?
Yeah, but I mean, I think what I'm suggesting is that probably part of the additional test, I mean, my colleagues may correct me, was to do with the fact that partly because they're carrying members of the public now, obviously they have an MOT as well. But also, I mean, generally speaking, that these vehicles would have been ordinarily on the road all of the time, you know, a large proportion of the time, basically. And I think we're in a very different climate now. And I guess the point that is being made by some members of the members of the committee that have spoken, that in effect is suspending the condition, say for a 15-year-old vehicle, suspending that condition and allowing it to continue. There would still be quite a significant additional cost, which is what the committee are being asked to consider, or an additional cost, which is around about £190, I believe, £189, something of that order, for this test. It was just an observation, really, that obviously, but obviously, as Karen has set out the reasons why the conditions exist and the reason why the RAC or the additional test exists.
Right. Is anybody oppose this in principle or in detail?
I'm not. I will go with. I'm supportive of the age of vehicles 8 and 10 years to be extended. Not a problem. I'm sorry, but I don't feel very comfortable supporting this 2.54 extended advance inspection, because I've seen cabs and I felt uncomfortable in them, to be honest with you, when they've been older. I know it's money, but on the other hand, if you're running a business, you make sure you look in the future what your costs would be. So that's only my personal opinion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's absolutely fine.
Chair, I see some hands raised. Paul Fishwick.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was going to put a proposal actually forward for the age of vehicles and the exceptional condition, that we have a period of 12 months from the 1st of October this year to the 30th of September 2021, which will be kept under review for the suspension of those two conditions, the age of vehicle and the exceptional condition.
Yes, it's a possibility. Or you just change onto the numbers. I'm trying to work out what the difference is, really.
I also have Abdul Lois.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Abdul.
Yeah, sorry, just before I vote on, or before even I put my recommendation, roughly how many vehicles do we have towards the 15 years of age, so I can decide whether to suspend, or if there's a health and safety issue of the driver as well as the public, when we have duty of care for both passengers as well as the drivers. So there's someone saying it's £190 for the test, but I would like to know how many vehicles do we have near to that age.
Sure, I'm going to ask Julia to come in at this stage, because I know Julia probably has the latest figures on renewals going through the application team. Can you comment on that, Julia, please?
I'm afraid I don't know the numbers that are going to be in the top ranges of the years. Yeah, apologies. We can get the information for you, but obviously not right at this second.
All right, no problem. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether we have a proposed, Paul, you proposed. I think you proposed what the officers are proposing, didn't you?
Chair, but I still have see a couple of hands raised. Rochelle Shepherd-Bay.
Yeah, just interrupt me, Luciani.
Sorry, Rochelle.
Yep.
Yes, my question is, if we don't know how many vehicles we're talking about, how can we possibly decide this? If it's 4 vehicles, it's not a big deal. If it's 20 vehicles, it might be more of a big deal, because we want to make sure the safety of the passengers and the drivers are important. We might want to save this till the next meeting, to reserve it to the next meeting, so we have the actual numbers.
Yeah, I think it's the principle of what we're looking to do that we're actually asking the committee to look at.
I think I would regard it as something of very little consequence for the public, but quite a bit of money for the drivers in the present circumstances. I think, therefore, regardless of how many drivers are actually in this position, it would be a good thing. Do you come back, Rochelle? If you wish.
I understand. I'm just trying to make sure the safety of the passengers as well. It's not just
the safety the test, though. The vehicle's still tested.
They're MOT'd, but MOT tests don't necessarily say how safe the inside of the vehicle is. But if that's what everybody wants to do, I will go along with it.
Okay. I can see Rachel, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, so they do have there's a vehicle test as well as the MOT. It's not just the MOT. I don't think we can wait any longer on this because the drivers are really struggling, and they're struggling right now. I don't think we can just kick this one down the road. I also think perhaps the officers can help on this. I don't think there's any point in saying we can extend the number of years, but they still need to have the RAC test, because they can do that at the moment, can't they? They can apply for an extension, but as long as they do the test. So that wouldn't really be changing anything. I think we need to pause the tests as well, and I would second Paul's proposal.
Okay. Right. Is that proposed in accordance with the officers? I was wondering how to implement this if this is approved.
I had raised my hand. I'm not sure if you'd seen it.
Sorry. Lindsay, you have got your hand raised. Yes.
Yes. Rachel actually beat me to it. I was going to second Paul. I think we're in the situation where, talking to the taxi drivers, that if we don't help them, we'll find that it has already happened. A number of people have handed their license in and have given up, and a number are struggling. And if we don't help them, we'll find that when it comes to the financial calculations, you could end up trying to stick at the highest figure, and you might get 100% of not very much, because a lot of people have said, I can't afford to carry on. So I think that we really do need to help this part of the community. It is one of those that is extremely badly affected. You look outside all the stations, and the number of people using the trains has diminished. They are still getting some business, but as I say, I reckon it's 10 to 15% of what they got before. Normally at Twyford, there would be 6 cars waiting in rush hour, morning and evening. And I've been talking to them, and they said, I've been here all morning and all evening, rush hours, and I've had no business. So it's really bad. So if we try and stick to keeping the high figures, we might just find that we're trying to get money and there's nothing there. So when it comes to the calculation, it becomes something that we have to take into account. So I fully support that. And Rachel's already proposed a seconder, so I think we should move to the vote on it.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Lindsay. Just make sure that officers are clear what we're voting on, or members clear what we're voting on. I think it's what the officers are proposing.
Chris, I can see 2 more hands raised. Paul Fishwick and Michael Fishwick.
Yep.
Paul Fishwick?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. Yeah, my recommendation was suspension of both age of vehicles and the exceptional circumstances for a period of 12 months commencing on the 1st of October 2020, and this should be kept under review because we don't know how long this coronavirus is going to continue, and the situation for the taxi drivers.
Okay, I've got Michael Farmager.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm supportive of what Paul's suggesting on that one, and if I can't second it, I'm quite happy to third it. But I think that Sean makes a very, very good point about the vehicles not being used as much, so the wear and tear on the vehicle will not be as great, obviously by quite a substantial amount. But we are keeping under review, so I'm hoping that coronavirus will be a thing of the past very, very quickly. I think we all do, but how quickly that's going to be, who knows? But hopefully early part of next year, I'd like to see the back of it totally. But no, this has got my support. Thank you.
And somebody else as well?
This is Malcolm. I support it as well.
Okay, Malcolm. I'm just wondering how this would update the policy document. Are we in a position to update the policy document here now without consultation? Can we just do that if this vote is carried?
Chair, I suggest that obviously arguably we've had consultation with the trade as the proposal arose from a discussion with the trade. I mean, I think what's being proposed here basically is a suspension of the condition, isn't it, for 12 months with a review in 12 months' time. So effectively next year.
Okay. Does that mean we're updating the document, or just a supplementary saying what the suspension, how the suspension works?
I presume we would just update the conditions with a note that basically this was suspended period for 12 months with effect from this date. I guess that's the way it would work, and we would check that. I would imagine that's how it would work.
Okay. All right then.
Sorry,
yep.
Chair. Councillor Abdul-Lois, you have your hand raised. Did you want to speak? Abdul?
Yes, please. Thank you. My question is regarding, I'm happy with the suspension, but as long as we don't override any statutory, regulation and rules. Thank you.
You're asking in breach of statute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
We can do that. Is that okay, officers? It's not ultra-virus.
No, I mean the conditions are a matter for this committee.
Okay, I think we're going to go to the vote now, unless there's anybody else.
No, we can go to vote. No problem.
Okay, can we take a vote, Luciane? So we've got Paul's proposal, which has been duly seconded, and I will vote in favour. And can you run the vote, please, Luciane?
Yeah, hands are going up. Yeah, everybody voted in favour apart from Councillor Emma Hobbs.
I'm abstaining.
Abstain. I'll make a note. Okay, so that has passed.
Thank you. On to height of vehicles. Now Emma's going to say something. And other members as well.
Chris. Karen, what did you mean by height of vehicle? Are people complaining who are carrying a height? Because of the disability, because with all due respect, they've got to have a higher vehicle to get wheelchairs in, etc. I didn't quite understand what the issue was with them.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, this was introduced into the policy as a height restriction to make it clear what the requirement was for a wheelchair accessible vehicle to be able to access. So we've introduced a height restriction for both the point of entry and inside, and that's to enable a wheelchair user to be able to actually get into the vehicle, and also then to be able to sit upright within the vehicle and so in their wheelchair. So that's the reason those dimensions were introduced into the policy. The trade have asked for those to be reduced considerably, and really the proposal therefore was from the trade was to be reduced, but from the licensing team is to say, well, this was looked at, it's been to the committee, it was introduced for good reason to comply with other legislation, and therefore we're not making any recommendation that there should be any change to the policy.
Why did they want it reduced?
So that different vehicles which are perhaps not wheelchair accessible could be brought on as Hackney carriages.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay,
Chairman, I've got a few people with their hands raised. Malcolm Richards?
No, I forgot to take my hand down. Sorry, I don't have a question at this point.
Oh, okay. Rachel?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, again, the wording of the report is a bit disingenuous here when it again says that nothing's been received from the trade, because they are always lobbying us on this issue, rightly or wrongly. They are. And so we can't say that nothing's been received from them, because they've been asking about this for as long as I can remember. The new information we've got now, though, is the comparison with the other local authorities. And Karen, you'd said in your introduction that we're comparable with the other local authorities on this. But looking down the list, I can't see any does have such a high height requirement as we do, unless I may be missing it. Our height requirement is 54 inches, which Google tells me is 1,370 millimetres. And I can't see any that have that requirement. A lot of them just say wheelchair accessible. Now, the numbers, Emma was asking about the numbers. I believe they came from a Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee, but back in 2001. So, it came from the right place, but it is quite old now. And, we all support wheelchair accessibility, I think, on this committee. I'm safe to say that we all support that, and that goes without saying. But I still don't feel assured that the 54 inches is the right number, and the trade certainly don't think it is. So, I think we need to know that it's backed up by something that is relevant today, and that it isn't overly restrictive for the drivers when they are selecting their vehicles, because that's the feedback that we get from the trade.
That's obviously
we have been discussing this. We have been discussing this for a while now, so I'm not clear why this wasn't put to bed some time ago. If officers are just saying it's impossible to change it because of the Equalities Act. I think the Equalities Act, yes, Equality Act.
Sorry, could I come back on that? It doesn't say in the Equalities Act that it has to be 54 inches. That's the point. We all agree that they should be wheelchair accessible. My point is the 54 inches the correct height? And if you look at the comparison with the other authorities, which is the new information we've got, it doesn't seem to me that any others are that high. I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I can't see it at the moment.
Can the officers explain why we can't move at all on this? But presumably other councils are not operating in breach of the Act with smaller dimensions. Why can't we?
Sean, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, Chair. I mean, I wasn't particularly involved in this when this was introduced a couple of years back. My understanding, my recollection of discussions I had was that this was introduced to try and provide some certainty for the trade as what would be acceptable to this council in terms of. So what we were talking about here really was the ability to get into the vehicle, to get a wheelchair into the vehicle with a passenger in, effectively through the gap in the back of the vehicle, basically. And there were examples, I think, on the fleet where that was not possible. So there was a height indication put into the conditions of 54 inches, which was based upon the reasoning which I think Councillor Burgess has just set out. An old kind of report around this. My understanding is as well, and Karen or Julie can correct me with this, but the vehicles were affected by this were given effectively 5 years to upgrade to the new to meet the new condition, and that was around about 2 years ago, wasn't it? So these vehicles have still got at least about 3 years left. Would be my take. Does that sound about right?
Yes, there's a date when they all have to comply by.
An alternative.
Julia, can you step in? Do you know what? Yes, they
I think it was 19.
23.
Yeah, 1923.
Yeah,
sorry, 2023. Yeah,
just about a year ago.
Yeah, so they were given a transition period, but the idea of the height the height indication was to basically give some certainty about what type of vehicles we would expect. The alternative to that is you go back to a standardised condition, which basically means that which identifies the fact that the vehicle needs to be adapted as such that you can get a wheelchair with a wheelchair user into the vehicle with the person in the wheelchair, without effectively having to duck down or anything else, basically to access the vehicle. So I mean that would be the alternative. Otherwise, I mean arguably it isn't wheelchair accessible.
So an alternative approach is to suitable vehicles, isn't it? I mean, has someone done work on that? It has only to be done once. Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty well what we had before, wasn't it, Judy? I mean, you can correct me, but it basically the old condition said that the vehicle had to be wheelchair accessible. We ended up with vehicles basically on the fleet that basically where the action that I've just described was unachievable, and that's why the condition was put in to provide some certainty. But I mean, as I say, Judy, I mean, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
No, you're completely right, Sean. The old condition was that you should be able to get a wheelchair user and the wheelchair safely into the vehicle. And when we actually checked all of the vehicles, nearly 50% of them, you couldn't achieve that.
Is there not a list of vehicles which are wheelchair compliant?
It very much depends on the adaptation of the vehicle.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So Chair,
I was involved in this a couple of years back with Councillor Bill Sown, and we found that very few of the vehicles actually qualified as suitable ones, and an earlier system had named specific vehicles that would be acceptable, but the taxi drivers didn't want to be limited to just those named vehicles, and if they had a different make vehicle, it was quite a job to try and get anyone to approve it. So those measurements came in after fairly extensive tests with wheeling people into, I think Karen might have been involved in that, wheeling someone into a vehicle of different heights to see what clearance was necessary. And the requirement was something like 2 inches above the top of the head, even of a shortish person. And consequently, I think the discussion came round to recommending actual heights inside the vehicle rather than the overall vehicle height, and it was felt that there were no vehicles on the named list that would be suitable. It would be better to give them an actual measurement. Then they could buy any make of vehicle as long as it satisfied the rules. So it's widening the range, and that was why it worked. And of course, they were given extended time if they needed to change. That's from a couple of years back.
Yeah. But they've still got 3 years to comply.
Yeah, and Chair, and some authorities, I believe some authorities do list vehicles that are acceptable, whereas obviously the committee obviously adopted a policy of setting. So really, I think they're probably the three options. You either have a list of vehicles that you probably see as acceptable, you have a general condition that, like you used to have, which was that effectively a vehicle needs to be able to be accessible to a wheelchair user in their wheelchair at the time when they access the vehicle. Or the third one is that you have a height condition. Now the question there's another question about whether the height condition is the right one, but basically it does in itself provide certainty. And as you say, Chair, there is a 3-year period yet still to come.
But the vehicles can be modified by the drivers, or they can get them modified. So although the vehicle is might have been on the list as being suitable, when it's modified, it's no longer suitable. Is that something that might happen?
Well, there are purpose-built vehicles out there, basically, which in all circumstances will be suitable. And then I think what you've got is a blend. And again, my colleagues may correct me, but what you've got is a number of vehicles which are conversions, and these are the ones where basically we've had the problems in the past, where effectively the conversion has been done to effectively allow a wheelchair into the back of the vehicle, but for example the floor hasn't been dropped, so you haven't had the height available, basically whereby you could actually get the wheelchair in with an adult passenger, with an adult user, sorry, in the wheelchair.
Okay. Does anybody else want to speak? I don't know what members would any proposals.
Sorry, Chairman, I can see a number of people with their hands raised. I've got Lindsay Ferris.
Yes, Lindsay.
Right,
Lindsay and his dogs.
Sorry, I got a not. I forgot to turn off our older ones barking a bit. Sorry. Malcolm summed it up quite well, because a number of us on this committee had quite a long go through this issue. One of the things that taxi drivers made certainly to myself on this issue is they wanted to be absolutely clear what the situation was, because what they didn't want was uncertainty. So I think we have to, I think where we are at the moment, I think we stay with what we've got. We've still got 3 years to be able to review it, because there's two sides of the equation here. If you've got somebody who's looked at our 54 inches and then managed to get a vehicle adapted or purchased to that, and then we come along and make something that's a bit wibbly wobbly, they're not going to be very happy. So I think we have to find that balance. Now, I can't remember if it was 54 inches, but if that was the figure, then fine. But whatever the figure was, I think we had a really good go through as to what was a recommended size and what was practical. And we even took account of the vehicles that were coming, and a lot of them are adapted. So I think that I would recommend that we stick with what we got. They still got 3 years. And we go back to them and find out it's this issue of clarity. They do need to know what it is we mean. If we start wobbling about again, it will cause, I think, be worse than we had before. We need to be clear as to what we want.
Well, it's quite clear at the moment what the policy is, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Chairman, I've got Rochelle Sheffield-Bay.
Hi, yes, I agree with Lindsay. One of the problems that some people have had in the past, including some friends of mine who were unable to get their wheelchair into that and were left either stranded in a location or were left missing their particular item they wanted to be at because they had been promised one that was, but it wasn't. And it's better if we have the standards, this way we know that they will be able to fit in there. So I say keep the standards we have.
Okay, thanks, Rochelle.
I've got Councillor Sarah Kerr with her hand raised.
Thank you. I obviously want this to be Equalities Act compliant. Obviously, it doesn't state the height in the Equalities Act, and that's obviously up to us to decide. And I'm not one of those members of this committee that was involved in this before, so I don't know what happened before. But if the height has been determined on quite old information, wouldn't it make sense for us to review this? Because, you know, you can have any height above what we've got and it's Equalities Act compliant. Doesn't make it necessarily practical, though, for the taxi trade. And if we have got other areas that are able to be Equalities Act compliant with a slightly different height, lower than what we've got, that does beg to question what we based that upon. I know that we're saying that they have 3 more years left to comply, but comply with something that may not actually be fair. So surely at some point in the fairly near future, we should be bringing this back to review and actually look at the methodology that was used to determine that height and ascertain whether it is the right height or whether we should be looking at another height, providing it's still Equalities Act compliant.
Okay, we could do that. Or we could leave it.
Shall I make that as a proposal that we bring this? Shall I propose that formally that we bring this back to actually formally look at this and ascertain an appropriate height going forward?
I would second that, as Councillor Burgess.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a proposer and seconder? Should we take? Was there anyone else wanted to speak? If not, should we?
Yes, Councillor. I've got Councillor Bill Swan and Councillor Paul Fishwick wanting to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I just say that I was on the committee with Lindsay and Malcolm when this was discussed in some detail, and whilst on that committee, I actually approached a number of the companies that do conversions on these vehicles to try and gauge the actual optimum height that was needed. It was very confusing. I do think that it might be an idea to perhaps look at what conversions are available or what standard vehicles are available to see what heights, well, what vehicles reach those heights. I know there was one vehicle, and I think it was a Nissan NV200 that was particularly good. But I don't think the committee wanted to recommend a particular vehicle. But I do think we should have a look at what the conversion companies do as standard, and also what standard vehicles are available at what heights that would suit. And we've got to remember, it's not the internal height of the vehicle, it's actually the accessible part. So they've got to be able to get into the thing. I mean, at this time, a number of things did come up, and one of the other issues that I don't want to get into tonight was the gradient of the ramp, because you can have a ramp that sort of has got to get up into the vehicle within about 2 feet, and it was almost impossible to push somebody up there. So there were a number of issues, but I do think we ought to perhaps check to see what's available from the trade before we actually set these heights in stone. Thank you.
And somebody else?
No, I agree with that.
No.
Yeah, I did have my hand up. Sorry. It's Councillor Paul Fishwick here. I support what Sarah Kerr has already proposed, but my query was at the top of page 11. I'm not sure if it's Test Valley or Aylesbury Vale. It states it must be a purpose-built wheelchair accessible vehicle fitted to European whole type approval, full Hackney specification. Is that the standard that effectively we should be using?
Chair, if I could come back on that. So the purpose-built vehicles are the ones you will see that almost sort of like small, almost kind of transit-sized vehicles quite often, or the black cabs, which are purpose-built as well. So it's those ones that are actually built as wheelchair accessible Hackney carriages rather than vehicles which have been converted, which I think is where some of the challenge is coming. And so in all circumstances, I would imagine that obviously the purpose-built vehicles will be satisfactory in them being able to deliver for wheelchair users. But it's the conversions, and this is where we sought, I think, what the committee sought in the past to put some certainty. But obviously, basically, the committee wishes to go away and look at some of the options around that they talked about tonight. We can do that, and perhaps I suggest, Chair, if that's the route we go down, that we come back in March with that.
Well, perhaps we can, since I'm not sure what we'd actually be assessed, but maybe when you've collected the information, you can just circulate it amongst members of the committee. Yeah. And if members want to suggest an agenda item, we could determine that would be good, I think, rather than just wait until March for the information. It would take that long to get the information, would it?
I think what we need to be careful of, obviously, I mean, one of the reasons why this condition was brought in with the 5-year period was that we do know, as Karen has already set out, that there are vehicles basically on the fleet where this was a problem, basically in terms of accessibility. So I mean, everything needs to be balanced against that, but also obviously you've got this other issue now in terms of the challenges that the business are facing. But as I say, we've got 3 years as well on that. I think what we'll do is we'll get the information. I propose we get the information, circulate that to the committee in terms of some of the issues that have been raised by members tonight.
But Sarah had got a proposal. Sarah, you'd be happy if the officers did that? Would that be good enough?
Yep, so you're talking about getting something in writing to us prior to a meeting, but this would be formally looked at as an agenda item in the March meeting. Can I just confirm that was what was said?
I think my understanding is we're saying, what does a purpose-built vehicle look like in terms of, what are the dimensions around that, the standard that the council has just talked about, that Paul has just talked about, and then what are the options around. But actually, to pick a figure of, I can't remember what the proposal that was put forward was, 48 inches or something like that. We need to understand where that figure's come from. Because
and just to be clear, I'm not stating that we have to be putting in 48 inches. What I'm merely asking for is a report to look at the options available for us to put into our policy, whether that is looking at what Councillor Paul Fishwick suggested, whether that's looking at a different height. Again, it could be that the 54 inches is right, and possibly that authority isn't technically Equalities Act compliant, but the fact that there are so many differences amongst authorities, it does beg to question how we've arrived where we have. So I guess it would be good to have a report that lists a number of different recommendations that we could look at and decide which is going to be most appropriate for this authority.
Okay. Are you happy to withdraw your proposal, Sarah? We'll minute it that the officers will produce the information they've volunteered to do.
I guess how that affects what I proposed in the first. It's kind of what I asked for.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, you wanted. Yeah, you wanted a vote. I don't think we need to vote on this. We'll just ask the officers to do it.
Okay. The information. This will come to the March meeting then, just to confirm.
What? The information should be circulated to members of the committee when it's available.
Yeah.
But anything arising from that would be at the March. Is there no meeting between November and March? Is that right?
There isn't one currently in the diary. Maybe we need to schedule one.
Oh, we can always schedule an extra one if necessary. But I think that wraps that up then. Okay, members? If so, we'll move on to number 4, which I don't think requires too much consideration. It's about the taxi ranks. Or taxi rank in Wokingham Town. Yep, I think we just note that. And it's all gone very quiet, so everybody must be happy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to come in and comment. The reason that one was raised, it was because those were the ranks that were affected by the COVID closures. I'm not aware of any other ranks. For example, the Twyford ranks have remained open. It was the town centre ranks that, because of the social distancing requirements, had to be closed for a period of time.
Sorry, Chairman, I've got Councillor Sarah Kern now has raised her hand.
Yep, of course.
Thank you. So it was just a more generic comment on this agenda item, and this is more because I haven't been on this committee as long as other members. These liaison meetings that happen with the taxi industry, how is it decided how often these meetings happen? Who instigates those meetings? Are they more reactive, proactive? Who's setting the agenda? I'd just like to know, please.
Well, it's better negotiation between officers, members on the liaison group and the trade. We're willing to listen to any points they wish to raise. I suppose the sense they're driving it, but we may need to raise things with them as well that we're obliged to do. So it's very much a two-way thing, and you know, anything goes really.
Okay, so they can request a meeting and ask for certain agenda items, can they?
Well, it's very informal. Yes, as far as I'm concerned, yes.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I don't think we refuse them anything.
Okay, I just wanted to understand how this was done. Thank you.
Quite informal meetings, but they're minuted properly, as you can see.
Sorry, Sean, you got your hand raised.
Yeah. Just before, sorry, Chair. I just want to go back one step, if I may, just to the last item about the size of the vehicle. I just want to be absolutely clear so that we make sure the committee is getting what it's asked for, what it's seeking. So what you really want basically is a kind of briefing for the committee members on the kind of really our understanding of some of the positions adopted by other authorities and why they've adopted those positions in a sense. In the context of our own position of 54 inches, that's my understanding. Can I just be clear about that? And also basically the options around the provision by the various people that produce vehicles.
Yes, members, any comments on that? Are we happy with that?
So yes, I'd like to understand how we fit in with the other authorities, but I'd also like to understand a bit more information about how we arrived at the policy that we have specifically on this, and what methodology was used, and if there are other methodologies available now that could be used, and all the background as to how we sort of reached that, and if there are alternatives that we could have and could do going forward, consider.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, is that right, Sean?
Yes, thank you.
It's Lindsay here. I think it would be quite helpful to know what is equalities compliant as best we can. I think that's the issue. I think we all want to make sure that we're having something that meets that criteria.
Well, yes, the law. Yes, must comply with the law, clearly. Yeah. Okay, I think that wraps that item up. So move on to the annual report. So I'm not going to guess who's going to present this, so I'll just let the officers tell me.
Thank you, Chairman. It's me.
Oh, right, Julia. Right.
Thank
You're
you.
going to in a circle, I think, are you? Or are you drawing lots?
No, we yeah. Unfortunately, apologies, because Suzanne would have reported on some of these. So unfortunately, she's not with us tonight.
I hope she's well.
Thank you. Yes, I'll pass your message on. Thank you. So, members and chairman, the annual report. So this is looking back on the work of the licensing service in 2019 and 20. Essentially, it's setting out the work with some figures of licenses and as well as the Licensing and Appeals Committee and subcommittees in the period 1920. And you'll be able to see in Appendixes 1 and 2 some of the figures which we were asked to do a sort of comparison data going back over several years so that you can see the numbers of applications per year in various of the license types. And then in Appendix B, you can see the total number of licenses that were current at March of this year. That may obviously have changed slightly now due to COVID and how things are going. But yes, really, if there's any questions that anyone has on that. Thank you.
Well, I wonder whether Sean could give us an update on the animal boarding, because there's been a lot of work done by the Public Protection Partnership, which will be of interest to members because we'll be setting the fees for that. Sort of reflecting on what's happened during the pandemic, because that was quite a controversial item.
Yes, Chair. I mean, the item was set out in the item which has been removed from tonight's agenda. But in broad terms, I mean, clearly there's been a request by the trade that we look at the fee that was set for that. There were some proposals that went before the Joint Public Protection Committee last week, and those proposals will be coming to this committee on its meeting in November. Again, this is another sector which has been badly hit, of course, by the prevailing kind of pandemic conditions, with people working at home, with people not going on holiday. But nevertheless, the fee issue is separate to that, and we have taken that away, and we will come back to the next meeting with those proposals. And my colleague Paul Anstey actually was going to attend and present that tonight, and we'll ask Paul to present that at the next meeting for consideration by our members.
Okay, thanks. Any points, members? Thank you, Sean. That's very good.
I've got some hands raised. Rachel.
Thank you, and thank you for the report and your introduction, Julia. But I mean, when I read this, I didn't really feel like it was a sort of complete reflection of the work of licensing and particularly of this committee in the last year. I think there have been a number of issues with licensing in Wokingham this year that aren't mentioned, and overall, I think there have been issues raised at this committee and by the trades that I don't think that we have taken seriously enough. You know, there was a meeting back in July that was actually cancelled, and the reason given was lack of business. You know, this was a time when there were a wealth of unmet actions and issues from this committee, combined with the extra pressures of COVID-19. You know, I was frankly incredulous that meeting was cancelled. In particular with regard to taxis, but also the other issues. There was the fitness instructors issue. There was, as we've just said, the animal boarders. I think with taxis, you know, that the taxi trade, I think they do feel continually let down by licensing and by this committee. You know, we've said how massively they've been hit by the pandemic, but you know, 6 months in, what has this committee done to help them? We've agreed something tonight, which is great, but you know, Councillor Ferris was saying earlier, you know, what should we do in the period of the pandemic to help that trade? And frankly, we're 6 months in, and you know, I'm worried whatever we agree now is, for many of them, it's too little, too late. And there were many other issues that were raised before COVID by the trade, which I think they just feel haven't been taken seriously. And now, you know, many drivers are considering giving up or have already given up. And I know that's not all the fault of licensing, obviously, but I just think as a committee, we should have been reviewing what measures we could have taken to support the trade, not just taxis, way before now, and not being, not being a barrier to them actually continuing in operation. A couple of other points, more brief points I would raise. There was a criteria policy for licensed vehicles that this committee reviewed back in June 2018. There were quite a few complex issues within there, some of which we've actually touched on again tonight. It was finally agreed by the committee in September 2018, but it wasn't actually published until July this year, despite frequent requests on that. So some people were contacting me saying they didn't know what the policy was, and I don't blame them because it wasn't actually published for quite some time. Then there was the fee increases issue. We've spoken quite a lot about that to do with taxis, but as we've already heard, there were other issues to do with animal borders and very steep increases in fees. And as we'd said earlier, I don't believe that the actual underlying method, despite the audit over a year ago, the underlying method, we still haven't got proper assurance on that. Nothing sort of substantial has been presented to this committee since that audit on that, and I could go on. And I do appreciate the good work that is done, the work that you've done on non-compliance, trying to raise standards. That's what we all want. The guidance that you're giving, I've noticed the more of the presence that you have on social media to try and disseminate advice and information. And, I do appreciate the good work that's done. But I think in particular, this committee has failed, at least in part, to do its job properly this year. And I do think that people's livelihoods have suffered as a result of that. And I just think that none of that is really reflected in this annual report.
Well, you're quite right about the published policy, and I apologise for that. I should have noticed that. That's now been rectified. I think with the taxi drivers, you have to accept that it's a general turn down in business, as it is for many other businesses in the borough, and we are what we charge for processing licences and making sure the cars are safe and all the rest of it is a fee on them. But it's probably, well, it is quite small, ought to be a small amount of their overall, the overall amount that they take, which of course is reduced. So, that they are a business like many other businesses. The council generally has helped some businesses in the borough, but we can do our little bit. It's not fair to say that we haven't done anything. We have reduced the amount we charge for the licenses, but 2 reductions in the last 2 years. So I don't agree with that. But COVID has caused a great dislocation, and it's been difficult for officers to carry out their duties. Things have slowed down, but I think we are now in a position where we are making decisions and we are doing our best. We spent a great deal of time this evening on taxi drivers trying to work out what we can do to help them, and I think we've had a good meeting, and I hope it's not perfect, but I hope it helps the drivers a little bit in their present plight. Members, any other comments?
Yes, Chris, it's Malcolm here. I'm just looking at Appendix A and B, which is pages 57 and 58. I'm just trying to make some sense out of the numbers. There seem to be massive variations from last year to this year. I can imagine what might be the cause of some of them, but for instance, if we look at Annex A, page 57, premises license, people applying for premises for themselves, 27 applications last year and 103 this year, and this presumably is during the early months of the year when COVID was there and things were closed. So I don't understand why those numbers have gone up. Private hire vehicles, since we're talking about taxis and private hire, 0 applications last year and 187 this year. Are these brand new applications over and above we already have, the ones we already have licensed, or are they existing people queuing up to renew their licenses? And then, just as another example, we have school and community service vehicles. None last year, no applications for them last year, 41 this year. So it's these big differences in them, and I'd just like to understand how those numbers came about. are some of them people who've already got licenses who are simply renewing, or are they brand new people coming along to add to the existing? Why such big variations?
Just so you get an answer, these statistics all predate COVID, because the column on the left is up to March 2020, which is when it started, really. So you wouldn't expect to see any great changes through that. But I'll ask the officers to respond to your points, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Unfortunately, I didn't do this report, so I didn't look at the figures in detail beforehand, but it does seem very odd that in previous years we've had none, which would suggest that we didn't have any licensed in those years, which isn't correct. But to answer Malcolm's question, they are new and renewal applications, so they would be a mixture of the two. And as the chairman said, this is all pre-COVID, so this wouldn't have been, there wouldn't have been things that had happened since COVID.
Yeah. Because on Appendix B, private hire drivers, they're comparable. There's about 20 difference between the 2 years, so they're all right. And then suddenly, this year it's gone down from over 100 to 16. I would have to think that was in anticipation, because up until the end of March, we already did know that COVID was getting to be a problem because we had lockdown. It's a possibility that that particular one is fewer people applying to renew in anticipation of no passengers coming along. But private hire vehicles, 0 last year, 187. So some of it you think may be anticipation of business won or lost or expected, and others is because they overlap existing people renewing things. So it's difficult to separate them, then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think all the numbers were put together. So we didn't separate them out into new, completely new applications and renewal applications, which we could do if members want that in future, a different way of looking at it. Then anything to add, Sean?
Chairman, if I could just add, on the paper that obviously wasn't considered tonight because it's coming back in November, there was a section in there around things like the impact on the various aspects of the licence sector of COVID and things like that. What I think is that actually probably what we'll do is we'll look at the figures ahead of the paper that's coming back in November, and what we'll do is we'll update those figures, and we'll try and give you some indication, give the committee as well an indication of the number of licences that have been lost during the COVID period, and the number of licences, for example, that have not renewed in that period, to give the committee some indication of further indication of the impact that it is having on not just the taxi trade, as Councillor Burgess pointed out, but other sectors as well. So I suggest we'll bring that back if the committee are in agreement, if you're in agreement, Chair, with the paper on fees and charges. We can look at the whole thing in the round.
Yes, I think that would be good. And just one extra point: street trading consent, for instance, there were no applications for street trading last year, but 17 this year. And then if I look at the existing ones for street trading, can't find it now because they're not the same collection. Street trading consent. Yeah, it's consistent for 18-19 and then 19-20, and then suddenly it says this year there were none last year and 17 new ones. So they don't add up really. I just can't reconcile them. So I would appreciate, yes, if you're able to explain how some of them are and what they mean, that would be very useful. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Any other member?
Yeah, I've got my hand up.
Yes, there's several of us. I think Sarah's got her hand up and I've got mine.
Yeah, okay. I think Sean just partly touched on something I was going to say. In the report that was withdrawn, it actually said in there that at our committee meeting on the 24th of June, we received a paper on the role of the Public Protection Service in the delivery of the COVID-19 response. I mean, we didn't have a meeting in June, so I wonder if possibly that was one of the other authorities in the partnership. But actually, something like that would have been useful at that time, because then we could have actually dealt with some of these issues that we've been talking about. And I still think that something like that is relevant to understand the impacts that's been on the service. and the impact it has on the people that we're dealing with through this service. So actually, as a paper, that would be really good to have. But I'm conscious that possibly comes onto the next agenda item anyway, where we're looking at future agenda. But I have got a couple of questions. But Sean, it looks like you want to say something on that.
Claire, I was just going to say that the meeting that it was referencing was that, so the paper that you're looking at effectively was the paper that went to the Joint Public Protection Committee on the 28th of September, I believe, or the recent meeting, and it was referring back to a paper that went to that committee in June of this year. But what we can do, I think, because obviously we've done quite a lot of work around the impact on the service generally, basically, of COVID. I think what we can do is tailor that basically in relation to the impact on the licensed trade in Wokingham, all aspects of licensed trade, and bring that back to this committee when it considers basically in a few weeks' time the whole issue of fees and charges, because clearly in the current climate, I'm sure the committee would see that as relevant.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions about this report. Firstly, it talks about complaints in there, complaints received. What I'm not sure about is, are these complaints about licence holders? Are these complaints about the service? I'd like to know a little bit more about that, please, and the nature of those complaints. And secondly, you talk about setting timescales for issuing licences. What other KPIs are being used to measure the effectiveness of this service, please?
Thank you. I might need Sean's help on the KPI side of things, because I don't think there are that many licensing KPIs anymore, Sean, apart from a 28-day inspection for new designated premises supervisors, which is what used to be the landlord. When they come into the licensed premises, then we undertake to inspect and have a chat with them within 28 days. I don't know if there are any others for licensing, Sean. There's the numbers of sort of taxes.
There will be some about application periods, I believe, Julia. But we can again we can bring that back and feed that back to the committee.
So just on that quickly, sorry. So it's just understanding how we ensure that we're providing a quality service, I guess, and it's understanding how we're actually measuring that, really. So
yeah. I'm going back to the issue about complaints. Julie, you want to pick that up about the type of things and it's not just complaints. We've also had a significant number of service requests, obviously, from the trade during this period as well, where effectively they've wanted to talk to officers about the impact on their businesses. And I mean, Julia, do you want to just talk through some of that kind of work that's gone on in the last 6 months?
Well, just very quickly, obviously, this report's referring to the period pre-COVID, though, isn't it?
Right. OK. Sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's obviously referring to complaints prior to this. I mean, obviously, anything about that will be useful in the next meeting, I guess, for this period. But yeah, specifically the ones in this report, please.
Yeah, so they would have been service requests. So that's any concerns or worries or complaints that people, be it members of the public, other businesses, have about a licensed premises, or indeed a non-licensed premises. So it could be animal welfare, overcharging taxis, an unlicensed breeder, for example, an unlicensed pet shop. So those kind of things, and anything that something feels is wrong with a premise.
Okay, and what about, does the service, the Public Protection Service, get any complaints through at all?
Yeah, there is also a collation of those that come in, which are dealt with by Sean. I need your help on this one. It's collated by Suzanne and her team as part of that. But I don't know numbers and things on those. That's not part of this report. This is a specific licensing report.
I just guess it would be useful to understand, because obviously we want to ensure that the service is providing quality. So not having that information in the report isn't useful. It's useful to have it in the report and understand the public's view on that, I guess.
So just to be clarified, Councillor Clare, so what you're looking for basically is a figure as well around basically the number of complaints we've had around effectively about the licensing service.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying that there are any, but it is useful to understand, because we need to understand how this is viewed by the public and people that use the service as well. And this all ties into what I was asking about KPIs and effectiveness. So it helps us look at this more thoroughly.
Okay.
And that is missing from this report.
The 127 complaints relates to 2019 to
That's not complaints about this service, though. That's service requests, what Julia was saying.
Yeah, but you've got 127 relating to 18 to 19 compared to 176 to 18 to 19.
Yeah, I think, Chair, what Councillor Kerr is asking for is the complaints about the service, the actions of the authority with respect to licensing, and the figure around that. I mean, can I suggest that we basically update at the next meeting in November with that figure for the last financial year?
Yes, please. And it would be useful to have some context provided with it as well. So a bit of information goes with the figures, please. Thank you.
Okay. Right, thank you, Sarah. Anyone else?
We have got Lindsay Ferris. You've got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I think what I would say, and I agree with what Rachel said at the beginning of this discussion, I don't think this report fully aligns with what we feel has been happening this year. I shall be abstaining on this report because I don't think we should do another annual report, but I think we need to make a note in the minutes to raise the issue that a number of the committee are not overly happy with some of the elements of within the report. So I think I would just like to say that. I think it's we tried hard. It's not been easy, and I can understand a lot of the problems we've had this year, but I do think that we've got to up our game, I think, in this committee and how we move forward, because there's some very important issues coming forward. I want to put something under AOB, if I may, when we get to the end of the session. So on this, I don't suggest that we do another annual report. I think there's been a lot of questions asked about how the numbers have been put together, and I think those do need to be answered. But I would like to sort of flag it to say that there's issues with what's been in the report and what's actually happening. So that's where I'm coming from.
So just to be clear, are you saying that there are elements in the report which you think don't tie up with what's happened, or you're not happy with what's happened, or both?
Sorry, I think it's a bit of both.
Right. It's not reflecting what's happened, and you're not happy with what's happened either. Okay, I understand. Right. I don't think you need an answer there, do we? No. Anybody else, Luciana?
No, Chairman, I don't see anybody else with any hands raised.
I don't think we need a vote on that. We're only noting the report.
Yeah, no, you don't need a vote.
Nope, that's fine. So we'd move on then to the forward plan, please.
Thank you, Chairman. That's me. Bear with me a second. Just logging into my other system. Where the forward plan is, right. Okay, we have, first of all, apologies, because the 9th of March was written as the next committee meeting, which it's not, it's November. And the items that are currently or were on the list for the committee meeting was amendments to the policy to be brought back on the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards, the annual review that members had asked for on the taxi and private hire convictions policy, and also taxi liaison group update. Obviously now we will add the fees report that was removed from this evening, along with the figures and other items just mentioned on the annual report, and obviously anything else that you would like to hear about.
Okay. Is this helpful to members, or would you like something else?
Chairman, Councillor Sarah Kerr's got her hand raised.
Hi, thank you. I noticed from the report that was pulled, there was talk about the challenges with the workload that's going to be faced by the service at the end of the EU withdrawal transition period. And I wonder as such if we should be getting a report actually on the implications of that, what that's going to mean and what's actually going to be done to ensure a smooth transition, please.
Chair, if I may, I'll pick that up. Obviously, this was a wider paper that was meant for, this was written for the Joint Public Protection Committee. The true implications, I guess, of the effects on the service of the end of transition, we actually don't know yet, because it very much depends really on what the arrangements are post that. The kind of thing that we're anticipating as a service, which is obviously outside of the remit of this committee, is things like the kind of things we may be involved in, things like export certification, that type of thing, advising businesses on any legislative changes that may come forward as a result of that. But right now we're probably not in a position to give too much of an update until we know what the arrangements look like. I mean, what we do know is that a lot of the legislation is obviously being transferred into UK law, and there will be some changes in there, but we don't really know basically what that looks like for the service at this time.
Now, can I ask that is put down at an appropriate date when you do have the information to be reported back to us, so we have an understanding? So that's, yeah, brought back at an appropriate time, please.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as it falls within the remit of this committee, I mean, obviously we're always able to give an update on the work of the service, and the report that you've got there does talk a bit about that, the one that didn't come forward tonight, but we will bring elements of that report back in November for you as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
There's nobody else, Chairman.
Okay. No, Lindsay, you wanted to raise something. I don't think there's anywhere to raise it on the agenda, but
thank you.
As you're good, I'll let you say something.
Yeah, it links into the withdrawal of the fees and charges agenda item. I have spoken to John Horsall about things, and so I'm aware of the background. What I'd like to understand is what those of us who are not either on the exec or on the CLT, what input we can have at the appropriate time that can influence those decisions. Because what I would be concerned about is if we come back to the November committee and things have been aligned, we may not have an opportunity to put things through. So I would like an explanation of how we can specifically input on fees and charges. And I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, but we've got to remember that it isn't just the taxis drivers who have been affected by coronavirus. There are other areas where we might be wanting to look at something not dissimilar. There are also some fees and charges, as one I'm certainly concerned about, linking in with people looking after dogs and pets, and the charges that's come through there, particularly for people who do it as sort of a hobby, and others as well. So can I just have an understanding of where we can go? So if my group have got particular issues and I speak to my team and say we've got problems with A, B and C, who we would go to and what timescale would we want to do it by?
Well, I mean, any matters that you want to raise write to the officers and copy me in, and we'll put them on the agenda. You don't have to wait till the meeting. I mean, any comments on the fees and charges in advance are fine with me, because the officers and politicians will be able to consider them at greater length. So please go ahead.
Chair, if I may just help actually just to explain the process to Councillor Ferris. So basically, the way the process works is that clearly, obviously, with the shared service, the joint committee basically recommends to the three councils effectively a budget for the forthcoming year. Within that recommendation is a recommendation around the schedule of fees and charges. Now, the role of the committee is only to recommend that, the joint committee, the Joint Public Protection Committee, and then the process within Wokingham, as I understand it, is that would come here to this committee for consideration, which it was due to come to tonight, but it's now coming in November. And obviously there will be the opportunity for this committee then to have an input at that point. There will also be other points of input. So, for example, there will be the statutory consultation around taxi and private hire vehicle fees and private hire operators. The committee also has the option, basically, as it did with the animal boarding fees last year, I believe, that we go out to consultation on specific areas of fees, if that's what the committee so wishes. It then feeds on, I believe, to the executive and ultimately to full council, where of course all members will have a say at full council. So that's the process. As the chair has said, I'm certainly as service manager, I'm happy basically to take any input during that process of preparing papers and everything else, and feed, and build that into basically anything that's put forward to the committee for consideration.
Yeah, I think that implies that applies to all items.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens besides fees and charges? What happens in the November meeting is it's just the same as would have happened tonight if we'd run it tonight. So it's the same. It's the same process, and we work out what we think, and then the executive decides whether they agree with us in a couple of weeks later. But any suggestions you have are very welcome from any member of the council.
So just to clarify, so the fees that were before in the paper tonight will be the starting point for a discussion, Councillor Ferris. So clearly you can, it's down to this committee basically to determine and sort of say, well, for example, that's all very well, but actually this particular sector has faced this challenge, or we don't think this is the right fee structure, and then you recommend it's for this committee then to recommend the fees through to the next stage of the, I guess, the political process.
Yes, thank you. I think it's just the logistics and the time order of things, because what I would be concerned about is if it was that we have the November meeting, but others have met beforehand and things have been sort of sorted before we get there, it doesn't really give us that opportunity to deal with those concerns that we may have. And that's why I was looking at a timeline, because it may be that you need to have views on any thoughts on the fees and charges at an earlier date than necessarily at the next committee meeting. Whilst we would be able to discuss those at the committee meeting, there might be an input that's required prior to them because there's something taking place earlier. E.g.
Just to be clear,
meeting, for example.
What goes to the next meeting will be what came to this meeting, which is what was approved by the JPPC meeting. So that can't be changed. It can be changed once we get into the meeting, but there's got to be the same, and this would apply to all three authorities. It's got to be the same as what came out of the JPPC meeting, which approved fees and charges from their point of view. That's correct, isn't it, Sean?
Yes, so what will come to this meeting as the starting point, and let's call it the starting point for discussion, will be the proposals that were put forward by the Joint Committee on the 28th, which are those fees that were in the paper that didn't go forward tonight, but will come forward in November. And that is the starting point, and I'm sure there'll be a debate at this committee about what those fees should look like as it leaves this committee and heads off to executive.
Yep. Is that right, Lindsay? Sorry, I was a bit waffly there.
No, I think that's okay.
Okay, fine. So I haven't. There's nothing else that I think is urgent, well, on the agenda anyway. So with that, I'll thank everybody, and I apologise for not being completely invisible this evening, and I'll try and get my computer fixed if I can. So thanks very much for your contributions, which have been very interesting and helpful. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
everyone.
Night all.